You to Westcott?
Well, my name is Ewart. I actually trained as an engineer, and that's my qualifications. I started off as a draftsman, design draftsman with stressing experience. I did this during the war and worked on what was called the Blitz buggy, which was a jeep which could actually be lifted by using a rotor like a autogyro or helicopter, as they're called nowadays, for jumping the dikes in the Netherlands for an invasion in 1941. The thought of actually invading the Netherlands before America had entered the war was not really feasible, but there you are. So I did the stressing. I also worked on the towing hooks for the gliders. I went from there, I got my qualifications, and I worked in various jobs as a design draftsman. Thought I'd like to have a go at rocketry. Went along, got the job, and the first thing they said is, we don't really want you doing rocketry, we want you as a plant engineer. Well, that's the last thing I wanted. I'd had enough plant engineering. But I did do 9 months of it, during which I managed to set fire to a building by trying to cut cordite with a bacon slicer, which wasn't a very good idea. But my boss said, do it, I'm going on leave. He went on leave, I did it and set fire to the building. It didn't seem to harm my career in any way. And after 9 months, I became a project officer. And I took on, the Gosling was my main project, as you can imagine, by the talk that's gone on so far. And that occupied me quite a large length of my time.
I'll come back to Gosling in a moment, but this was all based at Westcott.
It was,
just
indeed.
Outside Aylesbury.
Aylesbury, that's correct.
Why did they build a rocket establishment at Westcott in the wilds of the Buckinghamshire countryside?
I think because it was so far from the nearest town. I think that's the real explanation. It's 8 miles from Aylesbury, 8 miles from Bicester, and there was an indigenous village there, but it didn't cause too much trouble, and we didn't have any really nasties on the site. It's not a high explosive site. It doesn't make cordite, it doesn't make plastic propellant, never did. It would make very, very small amounts of explosive material, but they would be minute and not likely to cause any trouble. So what we were dealing with were propellants as against explosives.
Tell me about Gosling.
Gosling? Well, Gosling went through a series of... actually, I've got a paper you might like, a copy of it. It went through a series of developments. It started off as a cordite motor. It's about 10 inches diameter, 12 inches long, and was used as a boost motor for Sea Slug, Bloodhound and Thunderbird, the three major defence weapons in the UK. One belonged to the Army, one Air Force and one Navy. And along came plastic propellant, which is a composite propellant containing ammonium perchlorate and a binder polyisobutylene, and that has got a much higher specific density. It's also got a much higher density, higher specific impulse, higher density, and therefore a higher performance. It went through a series of developments, including the addition of aluminium in various amounts, and finally finished up as Gosling 15, and that is the motor that went into service in the three. Now that extended from when I took it over in 1955 right up really to about 1962-63.
Now, I understand from the meeting today that you had some very interesting occurrences that happened at Westcott. Tell me some of your favourite experiences, good and bad.
Were you there when I talked about the jackdaw?
No.
Oh, well, the jackdaw was a rocket motor. It was a 2/5 scale for blue steel, which was going to be launched from one of the Vulcan or Valiant type bombers. And I went to see Barnes Wallis, who you no doubt have heard of. Now, any resemblance between Dr. Barnes Wallis and the very nice gentleman in the Dam Busters is purely fictitious. He was a tartar. I don't mean that disagreeably. He knew exactly what he wanted, and he got where he was, and he did what he was by being quite ruthless, and that was what he wanted, and that's what we did. It had twin blast pipes. Now, if you screw a nozzle into a rocket motor tube, and the blast pipes have to line up with the what we call the flutes, if you like, then there is nowhere for the gas to go. So when you fire it, it blows the end off. So we had to scoop out some of the propellant to do this. Now, Dr. Crook, who was my boss, was slightly parsimonious and didn't believe in wasting a perfectly good rocket motor. So he said, go over to the bomb dump where we kept our misfires and resurrect it and put a new blast pipe in. Well, when I went over there was only half the charge left. The rest had been eaten by mice and rats. And the reason for this is ammonium picrate has got a disgusting taste. If you get it on your fingers and you taste it, it's absolutely, well, vile. But the propellant has got 1% lecithin in it, which is a wetting agent, and is used in the manufacture of chocolate. Now, the rats and mice can distinguish this, and it's very, very palatable to them, and they actually eat the propellant.
Did they get poisoned?
Well, I didn't find any dead ones, so presumably not. But I suppose it's all right as long as you only light a match in their vicinity. But I think their breath will be pretty potent. But well, that's what happened.
Did you have any disasters during rocket firing?
Oh, good Lord, yes, in 32 years. Oh, certainly, yes, of course we did.
What were your favourites?
Well, the favourites were the ones that we did deliberately. We were trying to discover why plastic propellant doesn't like low temperature. And John Rolfe, who you met as well, and I worked on this, and we produced a paper, The Behaviour of Plastic Propellant at Low Temperature, and we deliberately took the motors down to -60 and then fired them to see what happened at different pressures. We put different sized nozzles in to adjust the pressure. And we finished up with all office full of bits and pieces where these motors had burst. And we came to the conclusion that it was the rate of rise of the pressure in the rocket motor. The propellant couldn't expand quickly enough. It cracked. And if it cracks, of course, it increases the area, and that increases the pressure, and hence the motor burst.
Have you had any very, very strange characters at Westcott?
Oh, Lord, yes. There was Dr. Goya, who was a 3-time PhD and spoke Russian fluently. In the winter of 1963, she came to work on skis, would you believe? We had another chap who was a member of the Alpine Club and had climbed mountains of various types, and he came to work on a horse which he used to tether outside the office. We also had Mr. Bodillan, Tom Bodillan. Now, we had a passageway which was quite narrow between the sets of office. It was about 3 feet wide, and I went along one day and there was Tom Bodillan right up in the roof, with his legs on one side and his back on the other. And he'd actually worked his way up. And I said, whatever are you doing, Tom? He said, getting in practice. And he was one of the first people to climb Everest. So that was Tom Bodillan. And then tragically died on a very simple climb somewhere in the Alps, I believe, which to a man of his experience was quite a easy feat, but something went wrong and he got killed, unfortunately.
What's your best moment at Westcott? What would you look back on and say?
I suppose everybody should say the day I retired and received my retirement gift, but I won't say that, no. I don't know, really. It's very difficult. I worked there for 30 years. 32 years, actually. I was frustrated. I got annoyed, I got all sorts of things, but I was never bored. Now, I think to work at a firm for 32 years and not suffer from boredom is you're pretty lucky, really, you're pretty lucky.
Just want to ask a slightly more serious, sort of practical question. When you're dealing with solid propellants, how do you actually pack them into the motor in the right shape? Do you cast them in? Do you ram them in?
No,
or?
no. Which motor are you talking about? Are you talking about cordite, plastic propellant, or HTPB? There are three different types of propellants normally used. Cordite is an extruded propellant, which is a hard, horny substance which you can't manipulate. You can machine it, but you can't bend it or twist it or muck about with it to any great extent. And that is produced by pushing the mixture of nitroglycerine, nitrocellulose through a mill which has a former in the middle which gives it its central shape, and an outside which gives it the outside shape, and it comes out in a long extrusion of about 10 feet in length. Now that is cordite. Plastic propellant, you fill the propellant through a pug mill, which is a machine that's used in the China clay industry. It's like a big mincing machine really, and it feeds the propellant into the tube. Now you put in the amount of propellant you need, plus about, 4 or 5%, perhaps a bit more, heat it up to 60, then you put it on the press, and you press a former through the middle with a back-in cylinder, and that produces the shape. The propellant then you bleed out the head end, and then as you withdraw the former, it turns a cylinder, which is the same diameter or same cross-sectional area as the former, and that forms the shape. And the HTPB, you put a former into the tube, and then you pour the mixture in, and then that sets, rather like a sort of self-setting compound. Look at it like concrete, you know. You can pour it in and it sets solid, and you put it, except it doesn't, it's rubbery, but you then pull the former out.
I know in practice it's remarkably stable as long as you don't use a bacon slicer, but was it a bit scary trying to handle large amounts of these things?
No, not really. It's quite innocuous.
Which leads to the other, sorry, I'll take over your job, but just natural curiosity, I can't stop it. That given that it is actually remarkably stable, you can kick it and drop it and so on, how do you actually light it? How do you ignite the thing?
Well, you light it by raising its temperature, which is what I did with the bacon slicer, of course. It was pure friction. I mean, if you if you get a bit of metal, say, and you sort of rub it hard enough, you will raise the temperature to its ignition point. Everything's got an ignition point when all's said and done, and it will ignite, and that's it. But it's very difficult to ignite it. I mean, sometimes we used 150 grams of sort of a magnesium powder mixture to ignite it. It wasn't all that easy, really. Sometimes it could be quite difficult.
And when your fuels did ignite, how much noise did they make?
Oh, terrific. Terrific, yes. Oh, yes.
How far away did you have to be when your average rocket motor was tested?
Well, the distance you were standing was not so much the danger to your ears, but the danger to your person if the thing happened to burst, which they did sometimes, of course. I should think about 30 to 40 metres if you're in the open, yes, certainly.
And how far away could you hear the blasts?
Oh, in Aylesbury, 8 miles away. Oh, yes, easily. Because my wife would say, you've been at it, haven't you? Because they could recognise the motors, you see. If it burned for about 3 seconds and was extremely loud, then it was gosling. If it wasn't quite so loud, more sort of dull roar, and it went on for 30 seconds or so, then it was raven. The bigger motors you could actually detect by the length of burning, and they got quite skillful in Aylesbury. I said, "Oh, you've been firing that particular motor today." Oh, yeah, he charged the security. It was anybody who knew anything about rocket motors would. I mean, you can tell by the length of the flame what the thrust is. So if you stood up on Ashenden, you could see that motor being fired, and you could, if you're experienced, judge the length of the flame, you could judge the diameter of the flame and the burning time. You could make a rough estimate as to what its total impulse was.
I don't know if you were involved in Skylark at all, but if you...
Not at all, only Cuckoo. Well, I was only Cuckoo, the first stage.
Right. I'm very happy with
Yeah.
that. And the other thing is, I live in the area. I live in a little village called Loosely Row, which
Oh,
is...
I know Loosely Row.
You know
Yes.
Loosely Row, yeah. I've lived there for 16 years now. And I know Ashenden as well.
Oh, really?
I've been to the pub there.
The Red Lion?
Yes.
Oh, yes, of course.
Absolutely. And it's so funny because I know exactly what you're saying. If you stood on Ashenden and you looked down, you could actually detect Westcott
Yes.
with no trouble at
Yeah,
all.
absolutely.
No, you gave such lovely anecdotes today. It was, absolutely brilliant.
Yes, that'll add a lot.
Sorry, do you mind if I just ask you a
Yeah,
couple?
but-
No, certainly not.
This morning you were talking about working with the Germans.
Yes.
Yeah. I wonder if you could just talk to me a bit about your recollections of working with the Germans and Papa Rydell particularly.
Papa Riedel, yes.
Papa Riedel.
Papa Riedel was a magnificent man, he really was. I mean, anybody further from the typical jackbooted Nazi, to use don't publish that, but you know what I mean, don't you? Couldn't be further from the truth. He was a very gentle sort of man, and he really was lovely. Did I tell you about the visit to Farnborough? Were you there?
Tell me again.
Well, I went. It was always the habit. We used to fly to Farnborough from Westcott. We had our own aircraft, a Dove, and it used to leave about 10 o'clock in the morning. We'd pile on and take us to Farnborough, and we used to tell our typist where we were, just in case anybody wanted us, of course. And I went in to see her, and I said, "I am going to Gestapo headquarters with Herr Riedel, you see." And Herr Riedel walked in, and he just looked at me and he went, "Mr. White." And I sort of went down in size to about that high. But I couldn't resist it. And then we had Fred Jessen, who was almost a Dane. He lived so near to the Danish border. You would never know that he wasn't English. His English was impeccable. Even the euphemisms that we use and the sort of odd expressions he'd got at his fingertips. He could pass for an Englishman anywhere and would have made an excellent spy had he so wished. Then we had a chap called Kretschmer, who everybody, I think, has agreed he was what one would thought was the archetype Nazi. He looked like it, acted like it, and talked like it. I don't know whether he ever was, but he did. We had Waldmeier, I think his name, and then there was another chap who was the first one to manage to weld aluminium. You know, aluminium oxidises very rapidly. In fact, you never actually see aluminium, you see aluminium oxide, unless you're in a vacuum. And he managed to weld it, and he was a very useful addition to this. But there were other Germans around. There was Wolfhard. He was a brilliant. He worked on flame physics, and so they were all the Germans. I never had much to do with Wolfhard. He was a bit more aloof than the others. Papa, you could have a bit of a tease with him, but he didn't have much of a sense of humour. I went up to London with him once, and he didn't know the way, so he said, "Well, you show me the way." And I'd been up there dozens and dozens of times, and I got on the tube with him, and he looked at the board, and he said, "Mr. White," he said, "I think we are going in the wrong direction." And we were. I'd got on the westbound train instead of the eastbound train, but...
Sorry.
No.
Yeah. Do you know what their background was from Germany? What they actually worked on in Germany prior to coming to the
Oh,
UK?
well, they worked at Peenemünde, most of them, yeah, on the V2, yeah, certainly. Certainly Papa did. They also worked with Max Valier. Do you know Max Valier, do you? He was a chap who was involved in the car, which was rocket-driven and blew up. And I've just had an explanation given to me, which may be the truth. When I was on leave, Papa Riedel went, I believe, to Germany. And whilst he was there, he unfortunately had a heart attack. Anyway, he died. And when I came back, his office had been gutted. All the stuff in his four-drawer cabinet had been taken out and burnt. And I was horrified because he'd shown me photographs of stuff of Peenemünde and early rocketry, including a photograph of Max Valier actually blowing up. Now, I know it's a bit horrendous, but in terms of historical interest, it was all there. Now, I don't know why it was burnt by a very junior officer, and somebody's explained it to me that it is possible that it might have had sensitive material in it connecting Popper with the Nazi regime. I don't know, I cannot say, but today was the first time I've had such an explanation put forward. But it could be.
Because some of the Germans suffered a tragic accident, didn't they, at Westcott?
They did. Schmidt, yes.
How did that happen?
I think there was one where a motor burst and one chap, I think, lost one eye. And he opened a business in a little shop in Westcott with his compensation. But that was before my time. I don't know about Schmidt, really. I think his name was Schmidt.
Actually, I understand from John Beckley that some people were killed.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. But I'm very happy with that beaver.
Any more that you want to...
The only one, how much did the Germans actually mix socially with the rest of the workers?
Oh, quite. They're integrated completely, yes. Well, you had to. I mean, Papa Riedel, for instance, worked for John Rolfe, who you've seen today. John was my opposite number. He was in charge of all the space motors, with the exception of Cuckoo, which was mine, and I did all the service motors for the Army, Navy and Air Force. That's how it panned out. It was purely by accident. I don't know why it worked out like that. I also did some of the imps as well. It was a bit of a mixture, and John and I, we worked together completely, and Papa Riedel would come along, he would have a discussion if something, or we would go and ask from his vast amount of experience, because he'd been in the business a great many years, and he was a very clever scientist, isn't he? So one can always learn.
Did they bring key knowledge with them, or were they basically just good engineers?
I wouldn't know that because they would have already been debriefed before they got to me, but they obviously brought knowledge with them. Popper started in liquids, and I think you heard them say why he left liquids. Now, I'd never heard that theory before. I thought he just wanted to change, but he was a liquids man, really, but he slotted into solids.
Okay.
Thank you very much
Wonderful.
indeed. Thank
Thank you
you.
so much.